Menopause is a stage of life roughly half the population of the world will experience, and it's one some people dread. You very seldom hear anything about menopause, and if you do, chances are it's negative. Today we're going to talk about that. Last week, CBC's Julie Dupre reported on scientists who are looking at ways they might delay menopause or even eliminate it. She talked about pharmaceutical approaches and even surgical methods. How do you feel about that? If there was a safe way to delay or eliminate menopause, would you opt for it? Why or why not? 204-780-0893. That number again, 204-780-0893. Our guest today is passionate about helping patients navigate any issues they face in menopause. Dr. Kelsey Mills practices general obstetrics and gynecology in Victoria, and she joins us by Zoom. Dr. Mills, thanks for being with us.
It's a pleasure.
Now, to be clear, you are not one of the scientists examining the possibility of delaying or eliminating menopause.
Correct. I am just one of the physicians who is helping people going through the menopause transition out here in Victoria.
Is it research that you're at all familiar with, or shall I avoid asking you any questions about it?
I think the idea and interest in delaying or, changing the menopausal experience has always been of interest to scientists. I don't think we're there yet, but it certainly is an interesting question and direction.
Well, it's one that's had a couple of people calling in already. Let's talk to Judy. Hi, Judy. Thanks for calling Radio Noon.
Hi there.
What do you think of the idea of perhaps eliminating or delaying menopause?
I think that may be one of the stupidest ideas I have ever heard. I'm 73 years old. I was thrilled when I achieved menopause and got through it. I haven't had to buy tampons for 30 years. And I cannot imagine why anyone would want to be capable of getting pregnant at the age of 60 or 70 because we didn't have menopause.
You've just made Dr. Mills laugh. She threw her head back and laughed, so you know, Judy.
Okay.
So that is something that you might agree with, Dr. Mills, that why would anyone want to be pregnant at that age?
I think what this caller is saying is that there are a lot of reasons to celebrate and respect women as we age. And I think that there are many cultures in which aging is a sign of your experience in your life. And I hear a lot of women say that menopause has been freeing. Women have to go through often horrific changes in their bleeding patterns, worry about unplanned pregnancy and contraception. And menopause can be a freeing time for some people. Absolutely.
Why is it then that so many of us feel uncomfortable about it, dread it?
Yeah, I think for a long time that stems from a lack of information and a lack of general conversation on this topic. I think for decades, women have been told this is normal, just bear it, grin it, get through it. And it's been a taboo subject. And so I think menopause is now starting to have its moment. There's a lot more freely available information, and people are really beginning to embrace this transition in their life.
Judy, if you're still with us.
I am.
What was the experience like for you? Did you struggle under any symptoms that were awful?
Oh, there were symptoms, but they weren't exactly what I'd call a struggle. You had your hot flashes that were sometimes a little awkward when you were sitting in a management meeting and you had to flap your suit jacket because you were boiling to death, or when you woke up at 3 a.m. with a hot flash and your sheets were damp. But other than that, it wasn't a deal. My doctor gave me, I think it was testosterone possibly, to mitigate some of the effects of menopause. And I coasted through it quite easily with the help of a little medication. And coming out the other end, it was just, as the doctor said, freeing.
Judy, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye. Dr. Mills, let's talk about managing symptoms. What are the symptoms that women most often need help with?
I think, as your caller mentioned, a lot of people are familiar with hot flashes and night sweats that wake women up in the middle of the night. I think we're paying more and more attention to women talking about mood changes that happen during the transition, certainly changes in bleeding pattern. And we're learning more and more that symptoms like joint pains, like palpitations, like bladder, and vaginal and vulvar symptoms, those are all validated symptoms of menopause. And women are becoming more aware that these are things that they can bring up with their healthcare provider. And all of the symptoms that I mentioned have possible treatments.
204-780-0893 is the number to call if you've got questions about menopause, if you want to tell us what your experience has been like, or if you want to freely admit that if there were a safe way to avoid it, you'd avoid it. 204-780-0893. You know, this is something that happens to people born female. So, you know, but that it impacts men and children as well. Maybe you want to talk about your mom. Maybe you want to talk about, what do I do? You know, it was an experience for me as a husband to learn about keeping the heat down and just putting on another sweater. Join our conversation, 204-780-0893. Hormone replacement therapy. A number of years ago, was that 15 years ago? 20, perhaps, there was a big nurses study that came out that said it could be dangerous, or that was one of the concerns. And I know there was a real rush then for people to join, to get off hormone replacement therapy, which may not have been the right thing to do. What do you think, Dr.
That's a
Mills?
great point. So the study you're referring to was the Women's Health Initiative, or the WHI, and that was a big study that looked at hormone therapy in a certain group of women at a big age range. And we've learned a lot of valuable lessons from that study. Unfortunately, what happened was that the messaging that came out of that study, which still remains for a lot of physicians and women, is that hormone therapy is dangerous, that it causes cancer, that it's not appropriate treatment. And now, after reanalyzing the data and looking at safe ways to prescribe hormone therapy for young people under the age of 60, we understand that hormone therapy is a safe and first-line option treatment for people who are having hot flashes and night sweats and even mood challenges. But you're absolutely right. That was a very big study. We learned a lot from it. But one of the major criticisms was that women who were in their 60s and 70s were put on large doses of hormone therapy. And then we saw increased risks of things like heart attacks and blood clots. And we've learned a lot about how to properly and safely prescribe hormone therapy. And all major menopause guidelines agree that hormone therapy is safe first-line therapy for women in menopause.
Margaret, thank you for calling Radio Noon. Hi,
Hello.
Margaret. Hello.
Hi. Good. Hi. How are you?
I'm great. What do you think of our question today and the research that some scientists are doing into perhaps delaying or even eliminating menopause?
I think it's a very poor option to spend money on and resources on. I can see spending time and energy on helping those women that need it to get through menopause. I had very heavy flow at that point, the hot flashes, everything else, but I would rather do that than have a period until I'm 75, 95. And be pregnant. Like, I just think that's ludicrous. I've talked to my daughters who are in their 40s and 50s, and all of them are saying, like, I'm just waiting for menopause. I want it done. I want finished with buying pads and tampons and the whole business. And they thought it was silly that we're trying to do that.
Margaret, thank you so much for joining our conversation. How much of this, Dr. Mills, is because it's something that we haven't talked about before, because it has to do with things that people thought were unpleasant or you didn't bring up in company, or because it happens to women and therefore it doesn't get as, that it's known, that's research into women's health issues isn't as well funded as research into men's health issues. I'm not making that up. How much of that misunderstanding can be blamed on those gender factors?
I think you've touched on quite a few things that add to sort of the menopause mystique, if I can call it that. Certainly, one of the issues is that there are aspects of the menopause transition that are sort of intimate health issues. So, a lot of people, and maybe even a lot of physicians or practitioners, have a challenging time talking about bleeding or talking about vulvar skin changes or things like that. I think another major issue that needs to be addressed is the stigma around female aging. And it is not tolerated or accepted that we see women age. And just look, what happens in the media watching female celebrities age, for example. I think another issue that, there was a great New York Times article written last year by menopause experts. And one of the I'll paraphrase, but one of the statements was around the normalization and acceptance of female suffering. And this idea that women suffering in the menopause transition, that this was just something they had to do and was acceptable. And I think that a lot of those sentiments are changing. And I just want your listeners to know that if you're struggling with terrible bleeding, if you're struggling with soaking, drenching night sweats or horrible mood changes, there are treatment options out there. And please go to your medical provider and say, I need help. This may be a normal stage of life, but what I'm going through is not normal or acceptable for me.
Brenda joins us now. Brenda, what's your experience been with menopause?
Hi. Well, I was postmenopausal at 42.
Gosh, that's young.
Yeah, it is really young. Like I was having symptoms before, like maybe, 5 years before. It took a while. The doctor I was seeing at the time wouldn't take it seriously. He said, well, I can give you something to calm you down. And I walked out of his office and found another doctor. It was actually a Chinese doctor that was doing some treatment on me. And he said, I don't think my treatment's working. I would get these tests done. And it was the FSH and LSH hormone tests. And I found a great doctor. And she did them. And she couldn't believe what she was seeing, that I was very postmenopausal at 42.
Well, thank goodness for that doctor you went to for traditional medicines. I'm assuming that you mentioned he
Well,
was a Chinese practitioner, but he did point you in the right direction.
yes, he certainly did.
When you hear
Yeah.
stories like this, Dr. Mills, how frustrating is it for you as someone who strives to provide great care that women like Brenda get laughed at or told, you just need to calm down? Not laughed at, but you know what I mean? Not taken seriously.
I would tell you that Brenda's story is not a rare one that I've heard. I hear a lot of women who tell me that they were told that they just needed more antidepressants or anti-anxiety drugs. And then they would say, I'm still not feeling right. And Brenda's story in particular is really important because we know from good quality scientific studies that women who go through menopause under age 45 are at increased risk of heart disease, of dementia, of osteoporosis. And we need to pay particular attention to people who are going through menopause on the earlier side so that we can help them with preventative health maneuvers.
That is one of the arguments that the scientists who are looking at delaying menopause make, is if perhaps estrogen drops in estrogen levels are responsible for these health issues that do crop up post-menopause. Do you think that's enough of a reason to keep looking for a way to delay menopause?
I think this research is really interesting. And I always find that when research goes in one direction, we learn a lot about it to help with other aspects of the overall health question. So I'm excited to see where it leads. But certainly, we learn more and more about menopause all the time. And this is an exciting time to be a menopause specialist and to be a person who's deserving menopausal care, because we have more treatment options now than we have ever had. And we know more about this process than we ever have. And so it's really exciting and positive.
We also have the internet at our disposal, which, for the wonderful things and the bad things, has one of the bad things is that it can spread falsehoods very quickly. Are there any misconceptions out there about menopause that you'd like to clear up right now?
That's a great question. I think what it speaks to is looking for high quality information about menopause. And so, if I can direct your listeners, there are lots of great resources out there. One that I would like to encourage people to check into is the Menopause Foundation of Canada, which is a patient-led organization with a scientific advisory board that I'm privileged to be a part of. They are doing advocacy work that is evidence-based for Canadian women, and membership is free, and it is an incredible organization. We also have great open access information from the Canadian Menopause Society, and also the Menopause Society, which is the North American organization. Patients can go to these websites and access high quality evidence-based care, because I agree with you, there is a dearth of information on Instagram and Facebook about which vitamins are going to fix all of your symptoms. And there are a lot of great general health principles out there. But I really encourage people to go to evidence-based sources, and that information is there for you.
There was something I saw, CBC News was covering it today, dispelling myths on TikTok about menstruation and whether or not tampons were safe. And so go to a reliable source and try to talk to your younger friends to direct them to reliable sources too. I can just imagine having been 16 or 15, whatever, and trusting TikTok as opposed to talking to my mother or my doctor, because again, the embarrassment factor.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of great information on social media. There are great evidence-based people out there really trying to get good information and take people through what studies mean and how they apply to themselves. But one thing I always caution people about is if somebody's trying to sell you something, then really think hard about what the conflict of interest is there and whether or not that's a good idea for you.
Well, Dr. Kelsey Mills, I see our calls. We have a caller coming in. Do we have time? Can we talk to this person? I always love taking the calls. It's the funnest thing about this job.
Absolutely.
What haven't we touched on? You've got the province of Manitoba, Northwestern Ontario, listening to you right now. What is it that you would like people to know as we wait to see if...
My number one, important point is that just please don't struggle alone. Please seek help and go to your physician, go to your nurse practitioner, tell them how you're feeling. Ask them if there's any treatment that you might try. And if your practitioner isn't sure, that's okay. But then ask if they can direct you to somebody else who can help. I meet so many people who have struggled with really terrible symptoms for 5, 10, 20 years. And there's help out there. So
and again,
sometimes we just
there are healthy options or safe options.
Absolutely.
Because that fear of the hormonal therapy is still out there. But there are safe options.
Absolutely.
Well, Dr. Kelsey Mills, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to chat with you. Dr. Kelsey Mills, is a general obstetrician and gynecologist. She practices general obstetrics and gynecology. Join the conversation